Hello, everyone. This is our main lecture for week number 1. This is screencast number 1.2, and we're going to be taking a look at chapter 1, What is Epidemiology? So here is the overall course description. I'm not going to read through this now. This comes from your course syllabus. But basically, what I want you to get from this class is one of two things. One, I want you to be comfortable utilizing epidemiologic research to inform your clinical or academic practice. And two, if you have an interest in doing so, learn how to apply epidemiologic methods in order to answer research questions. So again, there is my information. Best way to contact me via Canvas using the email, the Rocky Mountain email. You can also call and leave me a message on my work phone number at George Fox University. And then my other email for urgent cases is my Gmail account listed there. If we need to, we can set up time to meet. Happy to do so, whether we do that over Zoom or over the phone. Either way is fine. I want to make sure that you're able to understand all concepts and everything in this course. Also, I realize that many of you, maybe all of you, are doing this PhD program while also working full-time or part-time in some capacity. And I realize that the load of your RMU program can be challenging. So if there's ever a situation where you are facing a deadline and you're not able to meet it, please reach out, let me know. We can extend those. Ideally, you just keep kind of pushing through as hard as you can, just working your way through it. That's the ideal situation. And the reason I bring that up is just from working with past students, sometimes as they get behind, they need to then take an incomplete and complete this then the next term. But that's a rare situation. I'd say 97% of the time, everybody forges through and makes it through successful, meaning, again, if you're like, okay, I can't get week 7 assignment in on time, just let me know and get it in when you can get it in. So just communicate. Here's some little snippets of some recent publications. The majority of the things that I have done have been using epidemiologic methods to try to look for associations between preseason physical performance characteristics and future risk of injury in collegiate athletes. Those have been the populations that I've had easy access to, having worked in physical therapy programs in Division III universities for much of my professional career. I've also started to utilize blood flow restriction training, and I'm very interested in that. Have a couple publications in that area, and just recently submitted something for review for the APTA CSM conference in 2025. Last year, Aaron Jobst and myself published the second edition of our Physical Therapy Case Files Orthopedics book. And always excited about that because what I really enjoy about the book is the collaboration with all of the other therapists that contributed case file chapters to the textbook. And so it's one thing if I would have written it all. And what I mean by that is Erin is the editor of the entire series of physical therapy case files books. She has 4 or 5 books in this series. So she doesn't practice in orthopedics, but she's the overall editor. So I was very excited and very fortunate to be able to have contributions from many, many leaders across the field. Things I'm working on: looking at 2-year prevalence of patellar tendinopathy in male collegiate level basketball players. So I've got 2 years of data, trying to go through that now. BFR, again, this is the one that I submitted for an abstract to the APTA CSM, looking at occlusion cycling, so putting the tourniquets on each leg while the individual bicycles, and trying to see if there's a difference between those who bicycle with occlusion versus those who don't, followed by doing shoulder exercises. So can rotator cuff strength be augmented? And I'm also interested in health and wellness, so looking at dietary habits in individuals with chronic health conditions. Talked a little bit about the syllabus in Screencast 1.1. You will have weekly homework. Those may come in the form of mini assignments, not M-A-N-Y, but M-I-N-I, as well as forums and responses. And what you'll notice with the forums and responses, we're going to be using those to give you an opportunity to brainstorm potential research studies that you could do. Things that would help you with your presentation and poster assignment and with your research study design paper. The presentation and poster assignment I'm going to talk more about next week in week number 2. And at the end of the term, you're going to be critiquing an epidemiologic paper, so serving in the role as a journal reviewer, and you'll be writing your epidemiologic research study design paper, which will focus on an introduction section, a method section, and what stats you will utilize. This research study design paper should be a continuation of the work that you have done on your presentation and your poster. All right, so now week 1, the purpose of this week is to become oriented to the course, understand the basic definition of epidemiology, and to self-evaluate your goals and expectations for this course. Here's an overview of the week. We've got these 3 screencasts, which are listed there. A couple readings, chapter 1, which were given an overview today in this screencast, and then 2 papers that are listed in Canvas, Barak et al. And Yang et al. And in your assignment, this is a non-graded post. I'd like you to complete a biography, no more than 1 page, to include your clinical and academic background, future goals, research interests, and expectations for the course. All right, so some key messages. Epidemiology is a fundamental science of public health. And I think we can appreciate that, having gone through the COVID pandemic. Epidemiologists were at the forefront of helping us to understand how COVID-19 was transmitted, ways that we could potentially reduce the risk of transmission. And we have seen throughout recent history how epidemiology has made major contributions to improving population health. There's an interesting website, 100 Objects That Shaped Public Health. If you download the PowerPoint and click on that link, or just type into Google 100 Objects That Shape Public Health, it's really an informative website. Epidemiology is essential to the process of identifying and mapping emerging diseases, but there is often a delay between acquiring epidemiologic evidence and applying this evidence to health policy. So, epidemiology, this is the study of disease occurrence in human populations by counting health-related events in people in relation to the naturally occurring groups of which they are members. Epidemiologic studies are used for a variety of things, and some are listed here. So, for example, assessing risk of disease associated with smoking, looking at inactivity and disease risk, disease associated with occupational chemical exposure, musculoskeletal injury risk in sport, and of course, COVID-19 and other viral infections. Here's an interesting recent example, or recent within the past couple years, a study looking at an association of sitting time with mortality and cardiovascular events in high-income, middle-income, and low-income countries. So what's interesting is, one, the study's looking at risk of death based upon sitting, so lack of activity. And it's looking at or comparing that between high-income, middle-income, and low-income countries. Interesting findings. Excessive sitting time is a global problem. I think we could assume that based upon how society has continued to evolve with what it does for occupations. But researchers say sedentary lifestyles are increasing death and CVD rates worldwide, and the lower income countries may be at greater risk. So that's kind of an interesting teaser. Now you start to wonder why that is. So read the article, maybe it tells us why it is, or maybe this is just the first step in a continuing line of research that needs to be done to better understand the problem. One more new one I want to add in here, and this one just came out today. I found it on yahoo.com, and this is a great example of epidemiology. The article was looking at the top 20 dangerous cities for drivers, so looking at a 5-year average of motor vehicle fatality data. And so what we're seeing here is the top 10. Memphis, Tennessee at the top. For every 100,000 residents, there were 25, almost 26 people killed in motor vehicle accidents. So this is how epidemiology works. It's that counting of incidents, the number of times something happens. And then from there, that informs public health. So in Memphis, Tennessee, you start to wonder, okay, were these accidents caused by individuals driving under the influence of intoxicants? Or is this an issue of poor public safety, poor road conditions? Or is it a multifactorial situation? So where does epidemiology fall within the spectrum of research? Well, underneath the quantitative umbrella, you see offshoots of experimental and non-experimental. And epi, or epidemiologic methods, are utilized in both the experimental and non-experimental sides. And I will give examples coming up in weeks 2 and 3, illustrating these different study designs. Under observational epi is where we find the cohort studies and case control designs. Descriptive epidemiologic studies can also be done. And then finally, oftentimes you think about randomized control trials comparing one treatment versus a control group or versus a second treatment group. But within a randomized controlled trial, you can also utilize epidemiologic methods to identify rates, for example, see how the treatment changes incidence of disease. We'll see more about that in the coming weeks. So Hippocrates observed 2,000 years ago that environmental factors influence the occurrence of disease. So that is some of the earliest known origins of epidemiology. Wasn't called epidemiology at that time, obviously. The first epidemiologist, John Snow, conducted the first epidemiologic experiments and was looking at risk of cholera in London related to drinking water supplied by a particular company. So let's forward to the next slide here. What Snow did is Snow located the home of each person who died from cholera in London between those years. He noted an association between drinking water source and deaths. The number of deaths and the rate of death were higher among those supplied water by the South Wark Company. Now, I gave the example a little bit earlier about different contemporary examples or different roles or purposes of epidemiology. And we can see here that, again, kind of classic things, cigarette smoking and cancer, HIV, AIDS, understanding how it's transmitted. Same thing with other viruses like COVID-19, SARS, and Zika, understanding the transmission, understanding who's at risk in order to reduce that risk. Hip fractures. Does that seem obvious? Well, are people with lower bone mineral density at risk? Are people with poor balance at risk? Are people who live alone at risk? Or the types of animals that they have, or tripping hazards within their homes? And then, of course, a popular one that sports medicine professionals are aware of is the risk of ACL injury in female athletes. So again, epidemiology, the study of the distribution and determinants of health-related states or events in specified populations, and the application of this study to the prevention and control of health problems. Those doing epidemiologic research are interested in things like death, illness, disability, as well as injury and mental health. And throughout the term, I may just use the term disease or injury, but know that many times epidemiologic research is interested in that kind of broad category. We can call them bad events or bad states of health. But epidemiologists are also interested in positive states of health and means to improve health. A focus of an epidemiologic study is the population defined in geographical or other terms. So, for example, a specific group of hospital patients or factory workers could be the unit of study. And as you develop your research study idea, you want to be as specific as possible. For example, I might be looking at small college, Division III, maybe Division II NAIA athletes versus Division I. I may be interested in collegiate athletes versus high school athletes. You may be interested in females versus males, or more appropriately, the term biologic sex females versus biologic sex males. So again, identify things as precisely as possible, because usually there is a purpose to that. I've done some work with migrant farm workers, and so if I was looking at injury within individuals who worked on a vineyard, I would want to make sure I was identifying those who did agricultural field work versus those who worked, say, within the cellar or who were working in the front office area. A common population used in epidemiology is one selected from a specific area or country at a specific time. This forms the basis for defining subgroups with respect to sex, age group, or ethnicity. So epidemiology, it's a Greek word. Epi means upon, demos means people, logos means study. Now, kind of broadening that term out, broadening the definition of epidemiology, it can be further described in these ways. So I'm not going to read through these, but you can read through them here by pausing the recording or looking at box 1.2 within your textbook. Some additional definitions or concepts here related to epidemiology, and of course epidemiology with public health. Public health refers to the collective actions to improve population health. Epidemiology is the research tool to facilitate improving health. So epidemiology is then a basic medical science with the goal of improving health of populations, especially those who are disadvantaged. So epidemiologic research is interested in the causation of disease. There is, of course, an understanding that some diseases have genetic factors or are caused solely by genetic factors, but many are the result of environmental and genetic factors combined. So helping to identify that, to appreciate that, can we then figure out how to reduce the risk of disease that's associated with the environmental component? Epidemiology also concerned with the course and outcome or natural history of disease in individuals and groups. So when we talk about natural history, for those of you who do orthopedic rehabilitation, you may be aware of things like acute low back pain, that it can potentially get better within 6 weeks just by the individual moving, not from anything that we do. Obviously, we try to do things to speed up the recovery, but people can sometimes get better on their own. Same thing was with adhesive capsulitis, frozen shoulder. People can thaw out, they can get their range of motion back after a couple years without treatment. Obviously, again, with treatment, we want to improve that. Now, with epidemiologic research, we're interested in what are the potential causes of disease. So with adhesive capsulitis, what are the endocrine disorders that can increase the risk? We know that people with diabetes, it may affect 30% of the population. Frozen shoulder might affect 30% of that population, where maybe 5% of the population, the general population, is affected with it. So by addressing health states, can we improve disease? And I think there's then a future there for, can we, through targeted interventions and improving overall health, improve the speed of recovery of something like adhesive capsulitis? So natural history, that's just illustrated here in this particular figure. Someone's in a state of good health, or a population's in a state of good health. They go through subclinical changes, they develop the clinical disease, and then hopefully there is a recovery that occurs from there at some point. Epidemiologic research is used to describe the health status of population groups. Knowledge of the disease burden in populations is essential for health authorities. Take, for example, mental health status in collegiate freshmen. This can be a very challenging area. So going from the stability, what's expected, what's understood, your 4 years in high school, living at home with your parents, your support group, your guardians, whomever it may be, and then going into an environment where you are independent, living with a roommate in a dorm, where you've got a variable schedule, where time is yours versus maybe it was more structured in the past. And then, of course, just the anxiety that occurs from being in a new situation. And if there is also any underlying mental health conditions going into a new area, which could worsen things. So again, just to kind of reiterate, epi research is again interested in health status of population groups. Now, what does a university do with recognizing that mental health status might change in collegiate level freshmen? Now they can start to do programs to reduce that. Once awareness is in place, they can try to combat it. Epi research also helps to evaluate interventions. How effective are the things that we do? So, for example, the length of stay in a hospital. Do they have better outcomes if they stay longer in the hospital or for a shorter period of time? Or looking at the reduction of lead additives in gas. That's an epidemiologic thing from the past. Removing lead, how does that lead to health improvements in children who might get exposed to it? Or looking at lead paint. The remainder of the chapter describes achievements in epidemiology related to a variety of areas. It's an interesting read, and it just again highlights some of these examples, these successes that epidemiologists have had. What I'd like you to do this week is review the Barak and Yang et al. Articles. I'll discuss aspects of these papers in screencast number 2. Also, complete the biography forum, and please take a listen to screencast 1.3. In screencast 1.3, I share an example of how you can conduct one study or have a study of a specific purpose to answer a specific research question, but with the data that you collect, multiple other research questions can develop and lead to additional papers. And I think that's some of the power and some of the fun of epidemiology.